Hey guys, it's Chris from Highline Guitars, and here's this week's quick tip for luthiers. Now, as you know, water-based finishes have been growing rapidly in popularity over the years for obvious reasons. There's almost no odor whatsoever, and cleanup is a breeze. However, when it comes to level sanding and polish sanding a water-based clear coat finish prior to buffing, can get a little bit tricky. You can either wet sand or you can dry sand. The question is, which way is better? Well, wet sanding works quite well, and it's a proven technique that's been used by luthiers for as long as they've been building guitars. However, with water-based finishes, it is imperative that you wait until the finish has fully cured before you begin wet sanding, because if you try to wet sand too soon after applying your last coat of water-based clear, you can reactivate some of the ingredients that are in the finish, and that causes the finish to soften, which would cause deep scratches and marring while you're trying to wet sand, and those can be really tough to get rid of when you get to that final buffing stage. And that's why a lot of folks after wet sanding struggle to buff up the shine to a high gloss scratch-free shine. It seems like they can never get rid of those really fine scratches, and it's usually because they begin wet sanding too soon after applying that last coat. Now, typically when it comes to water-based finishes, I always recommend that you allow one full 24-hour day of cure time for every coat that you put down. So if you put down 12 coats of clear, water-based polyurethane, you would want to let that sit for about 12 days. And the longer you wait, actually, the better. So to be on the safe side, it's always a good idea to wait at least a month, 6 weeks if you can afford it. Now, with water-based finishes, if you need to move faster and would like to level sand and polish sand sooner rather than later, you can dry sand. However, to dry sand requires some very advanced and exotic sanding abrasives. There are a couple of advantages to dry sanding. As I mentioned, being able to dry sand sooner rather than later is one of the big ones. Another advantage is, as you're sanding the surface dry, you can actually see your progress more readily than you can if you're wet sanding. When you're wet sanding, you have to stop what you're doing, dry off the surface to see where you're at. And with dry sanding, all you have to do is wipe off the sanding residue, and you can get a pretty clear idea of whether or not you're ready to advance through the sanding grits. Another advantage to dry sanding is that because of the growing popularity of water-based finishes, the technology behind dry sanding has grown rapidly, and as a result, with the right combination of products, you can actually do a better job dry sanding and achieve better results than you would if you were wet sanding, even with the best wet sanding products out there. A disadvantage to dry sanding is it's not necessarily less of a mess than wet sanding is. With wet sanding, you've got a lot of water that's full of sanding residue. With dry sanding, you're going to have a lot of sanding dust powder. And as long as you have a good vacuum system to remove dust, and as long as you also are careful to remove the dust by wiping it off the surface and then cleaning off your abrasives, you should be okay. But it's something you have to be conscientious of, because if you allow it to build up too much, you can actually start to mar or scratch the finish. And then another disadvantage is related to the advantage of how advanced these products are, and that is they're rather expensive. The good news is some of the products, like the product I'm going to show you here in a minute, is that they can last an incredibly long period of time, far longer than some of the wet sanding products that we typically use. Now, the product that I've been using recently for all my dry sanding process is a product from Eagle brand under their Kovacs product line. And it's called, there's actually two products in this line. One is called Super Assilex, which is kind of a goofy name, and the other is called Super Buflex. Now, the Super Assilex is where you start, and as you can see, that it's all color-coded, so you can keep track of your abrasives, and you'll know which one you're using and which one to go on to next, so you won't make that mistake of following up 1,000 grit with 600 by mistake. And the Super Assilex starts at 600 grit, and then you've got 800, 1,000, 1,200, and then 1,500. And then with the Super Buflex, you continue with 2,000 and then 3,000. Now these are very high-tech abrasives which are bonded to a flexible kind of a plastic-like material that has their own hook and loop fastening system, which is designed to work with their own line of sanding blocks. And it's really easy to use in that you just attach it like so, and then you can actually sand with or without the block. It's very flexible, so you can get into tight corners and curves and that sort of thing. And what I am so impressed about with this product, there are two advantages that I have encountered. One is the scratch pattern left by these abrasives is far more subtle than the equivalent abrasive in a waterproof silicone carbide sanding paper. So if I were to compare wet dry sanding with silicone carbide 600 grit to 600 grit Super Assilex, the Super Assilex has a much less pronounced scratch pattern. And that's true as you move all the way up through the grits. The end result is, by the time you're ready to buff, you have a scratch pattern by the time you get to 3,000 that is so subtle, it easily buffs out. And I found that after sanding all the way to 3,000 and then taking a guitar to my buffing machine, it took about half the amount of time to buff it up to a high gloss shine as it does when I wet sand it. So buffing is done much, much quicker. And the end result is also almost completely scratch-free. Normally, when I wet sand a finish, I'll follow up and I'll buff with 2 different Menzerna compounds, and then I'll finish by using a liquid scratch remover and a polishing foam pad. With this product line, I just simply go to the buffing machine, I'll use the 2 compounds, but then I'm done. It's absolutely scratch-free at that point. So it saves quite a bit of time as far as buffing out to that high gloss shine. The other thing that impressed me a lot about this product line is how long these sheets last. And so far I've done 3 guitars using 1 sheet from each grit, and it still doesn't show signs of breaking down to the point where I need to switch to a fresh sheet. So I have no idea how long each sheet will last, but I'm going to say if it lasts at least 5 guitars, it's paid for itself. And that's important because you'll notice when you check the pricing on this product, it's fairly expensive, but that's only because it's a super high-tech product. And when you sand with it, you know, you would just level sand like you normally would, and then every so often you just have to wipe off the surface to clean it. And it cleans up very nicely, so it makes it really easy to use. So I will put a link in the description down below for this the Super Assilex and the Super Buflex product line, so you can go check it out yourself. But if you're considering switching from wet sanding to dry sanding in preparation to buff out your clear coats, this is a product line that I would highly recommend you consider.